Hello there, Fact Boy here. The video you're about to see originally went out on our sister channel, Highlight History, so you might have seen it before. But also, maybe you haven't. If you haven't already subscribed to Highlight History, why not check out the rest of the great content on that channel after watching this video? And if you have seen it before, well, I apologize. And now the video. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make it with Squarespace. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. There is a link below. In the Roaring Twenties, Long Island housewife Ruth Snyder allegedly made several attempts to kill her husband Albert, including twice trying to kill him via disconnecting the gas line on their oven. She also tried running their car in the garage with the garage door closed in the hopes of filling the house with carbon monoxide. Another time she poisoned his bootlegged whiskey, but it resulted in it tasting awful, so he dumped it out. On top of that, in another instance, while Albert was 6, she allegedly added various drugs to the medicine he was taking, hoping the combination would kill him. In yet another incident, she reportedly released a carjack while her husband was under the car. She was unsuccessful in all of these attempts. So, well, why was she doing this? The not-so-happy couple originally met when Ruth, at the time working for Cosmopolitan magazine, cold-called Albert, resulting in Albert losing his temper and yelling at her. Ruth quickly apologized for calling. Albert then apologized right back, explaining his fiancée had recently died of pneumonia, and so he wasn't in a good state of mind. The next day, Ruth called again, and the relationship grew from there, ultimately seeing Albert get her a job as a secretary for Motorboating magazine, where he worked. The couple ultimately got married not long after, in 1915, and it pretty much went downhill from there, with apparently Albert's grumpy persona being more his norm, rather than his fiancée dying having been what brought it out of him. For example, in 1917, when Ruth got pregnant, rather than be excited, Albert wasn't happy at all about it, nor shy about his displeasure. He was in an even worse mood over the matter when she gave birth to a daughter instead of a son. As for their more day-to-day life, Albert had a habit of comparing Ruth to his dead fiancée, Julie Geishart, noting Julie had been, to quote him, "the finest woman I have ever met," and constantly berating Ruth for not being as good as Julie had been at, well, seemingly everything. If that didn't get you thinking that you too might kill Albert if he was your husband, Albert also hung a portrait of Gizzard in their home and named his boat after her, not Ruth. On top of that, as noted, Albert was moody and ill-tempered and further mostly just enjoyed being at home. Ruth, on the other hand, was extremely extroverted and loved going out and doing things, which she never really got to do once she had gotten married to Albert, as a woman going out and cavorting without her husband wasn't exactly super socially acceptable at the time. Ultimately, Ruth's father died, resulting in her mother, Josephine Brown, coming to live with Ruth and Albert. When her mother saw how the couple continually fought and how much they seemed to loathe one another, she advised her daughter to get a divorce as soon as possible, as the relationship was bound to end that way anyway. So this all brings us back to her alleged attempts to murder him. And of course it raises the question, well, why not divorce him? Why does she have to kill him? Beyond the scandal of divorce of the day, and that women at the time had very few means to support themselves if they did such a thing, Ruth was worried that she'd lose her daughter in the divorce if Albert decided to press the courts to give him custody. Even if she did get her, she was worried about her ability to support her daughter and find work at the same time. The resolution to this problem came in the form of Albert having a total of 3 life insurance policies, with some encouragement from Ruth on one and a bit of forgery on the other 2, which totaled approximately $80,000 or about $1.1 million today. Thus, the alleged failed murder attempts, with all these unsuccessful, though Ruth eventually decided on a different tack. You see, at the time, she was having an affair with an also married lingerie salesman named Harry Judd Gray, which started in 1925. Judd likewise detested his spouse for similar reasons that Ruth hated hers, and they also had similarly aged daughters. The two lovers got along swimmingly. According to the widely accepted version of events, Ruth eventually suggested that Judd help her murder her husband Albert in order to cash in on his life insurance. Judd supposedly wasn't too keen on the idea, however. Nevertheless, she supposedly continued to put pressure on him for help, noting the hefty sum of money that they'd stand to collect when Albert died. When the carrot didn't work, she switched to the stick, stating that she'd tell Judd's wife of the affair if he didn't help, and, well, that worked. If the idea of agreeing to murder someone to avoid one's wife finding out about an affair seems to indicate a lack of intelligence, this wasn't the only instance of this type of stupidity. In fact, the whole affair would ultimately come to be known as the Dumbbell Murder Case. Now, at this point, we should point out that Ruth did paint a very different picture of events. In her version, Judd was having affairs with several women, and over the course of their affair, eventually started trying to get money out of her, and when she stopped giving it to him, threatened to tell her husband about their affair, which she was afraid might result in divorce, where she'd lose custody of her daughter, being an adulteress. She then claimed Judd was the one that suggested they get a life insurance policy for Albert and then kill him. She also claims Judd had attempted to unsuccessfully hire a hitman to murder Albert once the policies were in place. Whatever the case, on March of 1927, the pair seemingly decided to follow through on their plan to kill Albert Snyder. While contradictory accounts by the two lovers, later tripping over themselves to paint the whole thing as the other person's doing, make it difficult to separate fact from fiction, the generally accepted story is that while Ruth was out with Albert and their 9-year-old daughter Lorraine for the evening, Judd entered their home through a door that Ruth had left unlocked for him, and he hid in a spare bedroom. When the Snyder family returned and Albert and Lorraine were both sleeping, the lovers entered the master bedroom with chloroform-soaked cotton and a window sash weight that Judd had purchased. It should be noted here that Ruth claims she tried to talk Judd out of it at this point, and he eventually feigned to leave, at which point she went into the bathroom, during which time she claims he came back and murdered Albert on his own. However, the accepted version of the tale is Judd's, where he noted that he hit the sleeping Snyder in the head with the weight, but rather than knock him out, it merely woke him up. Albert yelled for help and attempted to seize Judd, but Ruth allegedly grabbed the weight and brought it down hard on her husband's skull, rendering him unconscious and potentially the fatal blow, according to Judd. Nevertheless, for good measure, they tied a wire around his throat and used a pencil to twist and tighten it in order to strangle him, and then they stuffed the chloroform-soaked cotton up his nostrils and into his mouth. Next, they walked through the house, scattering some things about and hiding various valuable items to try to give the appearance of a robbery. As a finishing touch, Henry loosely bound and gagged Ruth, and then left. After some time had passed, during which Ruth claimed to the authorities that she was unconscious, Ruth wriggled her way to the door of her sleeping 9-year-old daughter's room and banged her head against it until Lorraine woke up. Lorraine then removed the gag from her mother's mouth, at which point Ruth told her to go to the neighbor's house and get them to come and untie her. The police were soon called, but after their arrival, it didn't take them long to sense that something was seriously amiss. To begin with, Ruth was extremely calm and didn't seem distraught at all over the night's events. The police were also suspicious over the fact that there was no indication of forced entry to the home. Ruth also claimed she'd been struck on the head by 2 unknown Italian assailants and was unconscious for a time after, yet when Dr. Harry Hansen was called in to look over her, he found no signs of her taking a blow, nor even the slightest red mark. The police also found Albert's revolver, which had been placed beside him, apparently to make it seem as if Albert had resisted the burglars with it. But why he hadn't fired it at the apparently unarmed burglars, if he had it in his hand during the scuffle, was a mystery to the police. They also soon found the jewelry that Ruth claimed had been stolen. It was hidden under the mattress. When the police told her that the burglary looked like a fake to cover up that the whole thing had actually been about murdering Albert, instead of reiterating that she'd seen the burglars and been involved in the tussle, she simply supposedly replied in a bit of a panic, "How can you tell?" The police's big break came when they found a memento Albert had from his former fiancée, Jessie Gishard. So why was this little item important to the case? The memento that the police had found had the initials G.J. written on them. And it's important to note here that Henry Gray's nickname was Judd. The police subsequently asked Ruth if she knew anything about J.G., who they initially thought may have been a lover of Albert's, and she reportedly replied, "What about Judd Gray? Has he confessed?" Soon after, the police tracked down Judd Gray, who was staying at a Syracuse hotel. Gray initially balked at their accusations, stating that he had been at the hotel all night and could prove it. In fact, he had a friend, coincidentally named Haddon Gray, though not related, mail 2 letters to Judd's wife from the hotel, so it would appear that he had been at the hotel. Haddon had simply been told that Judd was visiting his girlfriend. Speaking of Haddon, he would also go on to lie to the police about the whole thing until he found out about the murder, at which point he confessed his part with the letters. On top of this, unfortunately for Judd's alibi, when he'd left the Snyder house, it shortly thereafter, not far away, asked a policeman for directions to the train. The policeman would later remember this. He'd also taken a taxi from the train to the hotel, and the taxi driver remembered him. He finally gave up his story when the police explained that Ruth had confessed. He then stated that Ruth had forced him to take part in the murder. On the other end, when they told Ruth that Gray had confessed, she also spilled the beans, though she blamed Gray. They were both put on trial in May of 1927, with Ruth and Judd continuing to point fingers at the other for the murder and for corrupting each other in general. During the trial, the public and the jury strongly sided with Judd, who was almost universally noted as being an outstanding person, even by the detectives interviewing him. For example, the Herald Tribune noted, "He was a Red Cross worker in the World War. He was an assiduous worker for the Sunday School of the First Methodist Church, was quiet-mannered in the home and a local country club man. He golfed and bridged and motored. He was a member of the Orange Lodge of Elks. All facts now adduced point to a love-mad man completely in the sway of the woman whose will was steel and brain active and intelligent. She dominated him," police said, "and forced her will upon him, even when he desired to back out on some of her proposals." The district attorney himself would note that Gray was a decent, red-blooded, upstanding American citizen. You know, other than the whole cheating on his wife and murder thing. Ruth, on the other hand, was painted more or less as Eve offering Adam the apple, corrupting Judd with her womanly ways, and thus her side of the story was pretty much wholly dismissed. After deliberating less than 2 hours, it was decided by the jury that the general story Gray told of the events was likely the correct one, though both defendants were found guilty and sentenced to death. It had been initially speculated that Judd would manage to avoid the death penalty because of clearly being a great guy and under the influence of an unscrupulous woman. As for Ruth, sentencing a woman to death was no small thing at that time. In fact, Ruth was the first woman to be sentenced to die in New York in almost 3 decades in 1899. That execution had been one of Martha Place, who was the first woman to be executed via the electric chair, in her case happening on February 7th, 1898. In her case, on February 7th, 1898, her husband came home to find Martha brandishing an axe and attempting to murder him with it. William Place escaped and ran to the police. When they got back to his house, they found Martha lying on the kitchen floor unconscious, with gas from the stove filling up the room in an apparent suicide attempt. They turned off the gas and searched the home for William's 17-year-old daughter, Ida. Previous to this instance, Martha had on a few occasions threatened to kill Ida, even in one case resulting in William calling the police over the matter. Unfortunately, she finally decided to make good on the threat. The police found Ida not only dead, but having had acid put in her eyes and on her face, her mouth bleeding, and apparently having died from asphyxiation. Going back to Ruth Snyder, there was significant controversy over her being sentenced to death despite her crime, but New York State Governor Al Smith justified denying her clemency by stating, "The execution of this judgment on a woman is so distressing that I had hoped that the appeal to me for executive clemency would disclose some fact which would justify my interference with the processes of the law, but this did not happen." The New York Times would later report on this, stating, "Equal suffrage has put women in a new position. If they are equal with men before the law, they must pay the same penalties as men for transgressing it." Both went to the electric chair in Sing Sing on January 12, 1928, 10 months after executing their ill-planned scheme, Ruth first and then Judd directly after. Newspaper accounts differ on the execution, with many noting that Ruth was hysterical and had to be physically carried to the chair, while Judd took it like the outstanding man he was. Witnesses, however, paint a different story on the former, stating Ruth was calm and unresisting through the whole thing. On this note, Ruth would several times lament that the news media never believed a thing that she said and painted a wildly inaccurate picture of her, but made Judd out to be something of a saint. She further publicly stated, "If I were to live over again, I would be what I want my child to be, a good girl, really making the fear of God a guide to a straight life. I said before, go straight, and I mean it more than ever. And I wish a lot of women who may be sinning could come here and see what I have done for myself through sinning, and maybe they would do some of the thinking I have done for months, and they would be satisfied with their homes and would stop wishing for things they should try to get along without when they can't have them. Maybe there are women who have nice homes and husbands who do the best they can do for them, even if they don't like their husbands, and they could bear it if they would only make up their minds. everything can't be perfect. Going back to the execution, hatching a scheme of their own, the New York Daily News hired a reporter from out of town, Tom Howard of the Chicago Tribune, to attend the execution. They also equipped him with a special camera strapped to his ankle. Via pointing his shoe at Ruth while carefully crossing his legs to trigger the camera, he managed to snap a photo of Ruth Snyder in the electric chair at the very moment the current hit her and threw her body back against the chair straps. This resulted in a slightly blurred image. The photo was the first ever of a human being executed via the electric chair, shocking the nation after it graced the cover of the following day's paper on January the 13th, being dubbed the most famous sneak shot in journalism. And speaking of publishing photos publicly, there's Squarespace, which is shockingly good. Squarespace allows you to create a powerful online identity, a really strong online presence. It all starts on Squarespace with a beautiful template that comes with cool names like Pursuit or Royce. You can also just start from scratch if you prefer, or you can move over from an existing domain onto Squarespace, which makes everything easy to manage. And once you've gone through the super easy customization process, there are no updates, there's no patches, there's no tech BS to deal with, because no one likes any of that stuff. But you know what people do like? Squarespace's 24/7 customer support, who are there to help you whenever you've got a question. And Squarespace isn't just about an online presence, you can totally sell stuff or services on a Squarespace site. If you're looking to start a business, pursue a dream, do it with Squarespace. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/highlighthistory to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now it's time for some bonus facts. Although Martha Place was the first woman to be executed in the electric chair, two other women, Lizzie Halliday and Maria Barbella, were the first and second to be sentenced to such a fate. Lizzie murdered at least 4 people before being caught. She was put on trial and subsequently sentenced to die via the electric chair. However, then Governor Roswell Flower changed it to a life sentence in a mental institution. This was unfortunate for a nurse named Nellie Wicks, who worked there, as Lizzie ended up stabbing her 200 times with scissors, of course killing her. Moving on to Maria Barbella, unlike Wicks, she was not crazy and repeatedly admitted to her crime of slitting one Demencio Cataldo's throat in front of several witnesses. Cataldo was courting Place when he eventually took her to a boarding house and subsequently drugged her drink in order to get her to have sex with him, although we only have Barbella's word on this after she murdered Cataldo. Whether the first instance was consensual or not, Barbella and Cataldo continued to meet in the boarding house frequently later, all the while with Barbella attempting to get Cataldo to marry her. Cataldo kept putting the marriage off. Eventually, he told Barbella that he was ending the relationship and would be returning to Italy. Soon after, he told Barbella's mother that he would marry Barbella so long as he was paid $200, about $6,000 today. What neither seemed aware of was that Cataldo actually already had a wife and children back in Italy, and he was returning to them. Unfortunately for him, on the morning he was to board a ship bound for Italy, he decided to go to a saloon and gamble. There, Barbella found him and once again tried to get him to marry her. He not only refused, but reportedly stated, according to witnesses, "Only a pig would marry you." Directly after this, Barbella pulled out a straight razor and slit his throat, with witnesses stating that it happened in a flash, with Cataldo having no time to react at all. Because of public sympathy, the fact that she couldn't speak English, which hindered her ability to testify for herself during the trial, and that the judge had advised the jury to find her guilty, she was granted a second trial where she was found not guilty. She soon married and had a son, only to have her husband, apparently the bravest man in the world, break off the relationship and return to Italy. At least in this case, there's no indication this one claimed she was only a fit wife for swine. Hell hath no fury and all that. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor Squarespace. They're linked to below. And thank you for watching.